Welcome to the in-step coverage of Gargos, Vicious Watcher. Hope you're excited to talk about some Hydras and getting a Hydra Fight Club going. But let's go start off with Gargos for this deck tech. We have Gargos, Vicious Watcher, 6 total mana, Vigilance, Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast. Then whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, Gargos fights up to one target creature you don't control. So right off the bat, the things that are going to stick out for this deck is you're going to have some sort of target ability in your spells, incorporated into your spell building. And of course, you're going to get a very nice reduced cost on a lot of your Hydras, which is going to be a very nice effect for the deck. Now, as far as this deck tech goes, there's like 34 Hydras, mono green Hydras in Commander in Magic. In this deck tech, I'm just covering my top 10 favorites. So there's going to be a Scryfall link down in the description below that shows you all of the different Hydras. That way you can pick and choose. Because if you're not familiar with Hydras in Magic, when you think of tribal effects in Magic, you think zombies have Death Touch, goblins have haste, elves make mana. And with Hydras, one of their unique abilities is they tend to have just a very unique play design. One of the only core common themes they have is they like +1 counters. Outside of that, it's going to be totally up to you as far as whatever sort of Hydras you include in your deck. So instead of me just reading 30 different Hydras, I'm just going to cover my personal top 10 favorite. These are not the strongest Hydras you can be running in your deck, but for my playstyle, these are the ones that I really enjoy. So, if you want to go on a Hydra shopping list, be sure to check on the link down in the description below. I have all the different Hydras listed for you to pick and choose from. So, Managorger Hydra, I love this card. This is one of those Hydras that you can get down early, and whenever a player casts a spell, you get to put a +1 counter on it, so you can get this down early game. Let's say you have some of your counter support spells in your deck, you get those down, you start casting a lot of spells. This is kind of a spell slinger deck in mono green, and it does have trample, so you can end up with a very nice Managorger Hydra, highly effective card, especially no matter what point in the game you're getting it down. Because if you get it down late game, you may have a lot of pump spells you can put on there. Be good to go. We also have Colognian Hydra. This is a very strong Hydra for any sort of Hydra deck that you're building. It has Trample. It's going to enter the battle with 4 +1 counters on it. Then whenever it attacks, double the number of +1 counters on it on each creature that you control. That is a very nice effect for a Hydra tribal deck. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, a lot of these Hydras care about +1 counters. So the fact that you can get this Hydra down, you can swing in, double the number of counters. As long as you can give your creatures some sort of trample, or some of them do have trample. Let's say that we have Managorger Hydra on the battlefield for most of the game. It's sitting at an 8/8 with all those counters. Then you can double those counters. You're pretty much going to have a very nice board state to swing into and hopefully knock a few different people out of the game. And also Hooded Hydra. It is always nice to run some sort of board wipe protection playing in your decks, and Hooded Hydra is certainly that. So you can have it enter the battlefield with X +1 counters on it. Then whenever it dies, you're going to get that many green snake creature tokens. So let's say that we get Hooded Hydra down for X = 6. Colognian Hydra is going to amplify those, make it 12. Somebody goes for a board wipe, you're still going to end up with 12 snake tokens on the battlefield. And that's not including you having doubling season or something like that on the battlefield. So you can definitely see we're running Hooded Hydra or something like Managorger Hydra or the Colognian Hydra. That is going to be some really nice value, and make sure that your Hydras are a very sizable threat to deal with. Same thing with Voracious Hydra. This is going to be one of those tap out spells where you can make X be whatever. But the cool thing about this is it has a nice, very nice enter the battlefield effect. So enters the battlefield, you can double the number of +1 counters on it, or you can simply just have it fight a creature. Like I mentioned, this is going to be a great early game threat or a very, very great late game threat. If you need to swing in and deal a ton of damage to your opponent, like I mentioned, if somebody goes for a board wipe, you can just tap out for X = 6 or 8. Then it's going to double those counters. It has trample, throw lightning greaves on there. You're good to go. There's also Whip Tongue Hydra. I love this. It's a lizard Hydra, which is really cool to think about. Whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy our creatures of flying. Then it gets a +1 counter for each creature destroyed this way. Not a super high impactful Hydra, but it is nice to kind of diversify the amount of Hydras that you're running. If you have nothing but +1 counter Hydras, that may be a little bit clunky. So running something like Whip Tongue Hydra, that's going to make sure you can keep all those pesky flying creatures out of the way and end up with a very, very sizable reach creature that can stop anything from swinging in and at you. And plus, it's a lizard Hydra, which is very nice. Love that. Hero's Bane. Love this card. Enters the battlefield with 4 +1 counters on it. Then for a 4 mana activated ability, put X +1 counters on Hero's Bane where X is its power. This is a great mana sink for the game. So let's say that it's late game. We just have access to a ton of mana. You can get the creature down. You're going to be able to just amplify that power activation after activation. And this is going to be a very nice effect. The only downside is it doesn't have trample, but there's a lot of ways that we can give it trample. Let's say that we could put it at 8/8, make it a 16/16, 32/32. 64, 64, boom, give it trample. Good to go. Of course, Pelucranos, this is a great Hydra to run in any sort of Hydra build that you're going for. You have that monstrosity ability to kind of fight a bunch of creatures all at once and have that damage be dealt to Pelucranos. And then Overworld Hydra, that is a very nice effect. As power toughness equal number of lands you control, you are playing mono green. Probably going to having a lot of ramp spells in here. Like I mentioned, it doesn't have Trample with Hero's Bane, but if you can give it Trample somehow, this can be a very sizable threat. Then it just enters the battlefield. You grab whatever land you need. So let's say that you're building Voltron. You can grab yourself a Rogue's Passage. You can grab Guy's Cradle if you're going really heavy Hydra Tribal, or whatever sort of land you need. It's going to be an instant tutor for a land, and that is going to be a very strong effect and allow you to kind of further your board state. Same thing with Reef Hydra. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, put a +1 counter on it. And if you're keeping score at home, if it was a force, you get to put 2 +1 counters on there. So let's say that we have Reef on the battlefield. We go for Cultivate. That's going to be a land on the battlefield. That's going to be 2 counters. Then we make the land drop for the turn. That's another 2 counters. Let's say we have some sort of amplifying counter effect on the battlefield. Things can get very nutty very quickly with Reef. This is going to be a very high impact Hydra, and the fact that it does have Trample, you're going to be able to put a lot of pressure on your opponent's life total. And last but not least, Primordial Hydra. This is my favorite Hydra in all of Magic. This is the very first mythic rare that I ever opened in a pack of Magic cards, and I've just been in love with the card ever since. Enters the battlefield with X +1 counters on it. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1 counters on there. This is one of those, like I mentioned, there's a lot of Hydras that are great early game and late game simply because you can get this Hydra down for just 4 mana, 2 +1 counters. If they don't have spot removal, you do have to kind of keep your fingers crossed they don't have removal, but if they don't, then you get some protection on it. That 2 is going to turn to 4. 4 is going to turn to 8, 8 turns to 16. There you go. With a very sizable threat as the game goes on, and you're also going to be able to kind of further your board state at the exact time. So I love Primordial Hydra, and especially if you have any sort of amplifying counters effects, you're going to be good to go with this particular card. It's fun, man. If you've never get it into 32 or 64, you're missing out. But like I mentioned, that is just 10 of the Hydras out there. Be sure to click on that Scryfall link, see what kind of appeals to you. Because like I mentioned, a lot of these Hydras, there's just different playstyles that appeal to different people. So you may see 10 different Hydras that you enjoy and versus what I just showed you right now. So click on that link, kind of see what kind of jumps out to you. Now, if you are going very Hydra tribal, you definitely want to run some sort of tribal support in your deck. Herald's Horn is going to give you a great reduced cost. Same thing with Urza's Incubator. This is almost kind of like Commander B or C for the deck. That's going to give you that reduced cost of 2. That's going to be 2 extra counters for Primordial Hydra or whatever sort of Hydra that you're casting out for X. And also Metallic Mimic. If you're not going to run a ton of tribal lords in here, Metallic Mimic is one of the best things that you can run because you can get it down early game. Then each creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1 counter on it. That's going to be a very nice effect as the game goes on. We get this down on turn 2. We get those amplifying counter effects. We start tapping out for a lot of these Hydras. Simply getting that extra counter is going to end up with a lot of stuff. So let's say we have Hardened Scales, Primal Vigor, whatever you want to do. As long as you have some sort of amplifying counter effect, Metallic Mimic is going to be a great enabler for a ton of huge creatures. There's also Door of Destinies and Obelisk of Erd. These are going to be some really nice kind of static effects that are not going to give you counters, but as the game goes on, you end up with a really nice tribal effect. And like I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to go very heavy Hydra tribal in this deck, but if that's what you're going for, these are some of the best cards out there. And of course, Adaptive Automaton and Chameleon Colossus. Now with Chameleon Colossus, this is a changeling, so this is going to be a Hydra, and you do get the reduced cost, and it does have that very nice activated ability, again, +X, where X is its power. Kind of depending on, if there's a lot of these Hydras you're not really wild about, you can run Chameleon Colossus. Me personally, I'll probably be running a Hydra in its spot, but it is worth noting that it is a changeling, which does make it a Hydra, so you can definitely run in your deck. And of course, Adaptive Automaton, one of the best universal tribal lords out there. It's just going to give your creatures +1/+1. Pushing on the battlefield, you're going to be able to bounce back from any sort of board wipe very quickly. Let's say your opponent goes for Cyclonic Rift. Simply being able to get down Unbound Flourishing, that's going to allow you to just simply rebuild as quickly as possible, or simply just get down a threat that's going to allow you to close the game out as quickly as possible. Outside of these +1 counter effects, you're going to run some sort of kind of amplifying effect whenever a counter is placed on there. Pier and Hardened Scales are going to be wonderful, cheap options that you can go for. Mana-wise cheap. With Pier, that's going to just simply, if a counter is going to be put on there, put an extra one on there. So let's say that we have Hardened Scales, we put 3 on there, that's going to make it 4. And depending if you have some combination of you know, doubling season or primal vigor. I don't know how that works out. Long story short, there's going to be a ton of counters that you can put on there. There's a ton of overlapping synergy in a lot of these cards. There's also Solidarity of Heroes. This is a great card for the deck because you can use it to target a few extra creatures if you need to, but even if you're just targeting one creature that has Trample, choose any number of target creatures, double the amount of +1 counters on that creature. So let's say that we're swinging in with Primordial Hydra. It's sitting at a 12/12 that already has Trample. We go for Solidarity of Heroes. That's going to make it a 24/24. Let's say that's doubling season. That's going to make it a 48/48. Solidarity of Heroes makes for some just crazy wild turns sometimes that you can just simply instant speed for 2 mana, double the number of counters on a target. Let's say that we have Hooded Hydra on the battlefield, and your opponent's going to go for a board wipe. In response to that board wipe, go for Solidarity of Heroes. That's going to double the number of tokens you're getting. It's going to be a very good option. Also, with Biogenic Upgrade, this is kind of expensive at 6 mana, but it is a very nice effect. Put 3 +1 counters on 1, 2, or 3 targets you control, then double the number of +1 counters on that creature. Even if that first part, if that wasn't there, simply just having 6 mana, double any, like those 3 targets, that is a very good effect around, especially with a lot of creatures that care about having a ton of counters on them. Now, if you are running a lot of counters, you want to run some sort of counter support in your deck. Rishkar and Wildcrafter are going to make sure that a lot of those creatures with a +1 counter on it can tap down for some extra mana, which is really nice. So there's also Inspiring Call, which is just like Solidarity of Heroes, is an auto-include in this stack. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1 counter on it. Right then and there, 3 mana instant speed. You're going to be running a lot of counter creatures in here. That's going to be a very great way you can refill your hand and grab some sort of targeting spell to make sure your creatures can keep fighting. Then those creatures gain indestructible until the end of turn. That is a wonderful way to, you can go for this, draw a bunch of cards, set up a really nice fight turn. Once you give in Gargos indestructible, then you can just go to town targeting your creatures, fighting stuff, then swing in on the back end after you fought all the creatures. Great card for the deck. It's going to give you some really good card advantage and make it to where you can just really clear the board out. And there's also Ivy Lane Denizen and Mighty Emergence. These are just kind of low impact cards that you can get them down, and if you can really take advantage of them, they're going to give you some really nice value as the game progresses. Ivy Lane is going to give you that whenever it enters the battlefield, you get a +1 counter on it. Now that's very nice effect, but it's really going to shine if, like I mentioned, if you have that amplifying effect of something like Primal Vigor or Doubling Season on the battlefield. And there's also Mighty Emergence. We do have that reduced cost from our commander. We care about getting a lot of high power toughness creatures on the battlefield. Simply having it enter the battlefield 2 extra counters can be a really nice thing. And of course, there's Evolutionary Escalation. I love this card. It does take some setting up, but what you can do with this card is at the beginning of your upkeep, put 3 counters on target creature you control, then 3 counters on target creature an opponent controls. So let's say we have a commander on the battlefield. We're going to put 3 counters on it. That's going to make it a 9/10. Excuse me, it's going to make an 11/10. Then we fight one of your opponent's creatures. As long as you can just cover that power and toughness bonus and not lose your commander, you're basically just going to have this unstoppable fight creature. You keep putting 3 counters on it turn after turn. That's going to fight your opponent's creature. That's going to get rid of any sort of big creature. So as long as you can survive that first upkeep trigger, you're going to be good to go. You do takes a little bit of setting up with this card, but it's worth running in there. And plus, I don't know, look at that art. Pretty cool. I love it. Now, like I mentioned, we need to be running cards that target our commander. So running some sort of counter targeting spell is going to be great for the deck. So we have Soul's Might. We have a ton of Hydras that are going to get very big very quickly. So with Soul's Might, put X+1 counters on target creature where X is that creature's power. That's going to be a great way to really amplify that creature's power and toughness. It is a little expensive at 5 mana, but it is a very powerful effect. Same thing with Hunger of the Howlpack. Put a +1 counter on target creature. Then Morbid. Put 3 counters on that creature if a creature died this turn. So this is a very heavy fight deck. If we're fighting a creature, we can put those +1 counters on it. That's going to be 3 of them. Very good effect for just 1 mana. Then Courage and Crisis. That's going to be 1 counter on your creature. Then you get to proliferate. So it is a little clunky at 6 mana, but you're still going to be able to target your commander and kind of proliferate the entire board state with counters. So it's definitely a really good effect to run in your deck. And also Stony Strength and Burst of Strength. You can use these as combat tricks. You can untap a creature, put a +1 counter on it. Then, like I mentioned, with Primal Vigor and a few other things, that's going to amplify those creatures out. So let's say you swung in for 1 green mana, you can put anywhere from 1 to 3 counters on there, untap, and then catch somebody off guard. It's always nice to run some sort of combat trick in this deck, especially with your commander caring about stuff targeting your creatures. Now, If you're building a Fight Club deck, these are some of the best fight cards you can put into your deck. A Zeus Predation. For each creature your opponents control, put a full 4 beast token on the battlefield. Then those tokens are going to fight your opponent's creatures. Even if your beast tokens don't survive the exchange, you're typically going to end up with more creatures on your side of the battlefield than your opponents have, and that's exactly what you need to be doing in this deck. It is a little expensive, but this is mono green. You'd be ramping a lot, and like I mentioned, if you're running a Fight Club deck, this is that is a really good way to end up with a ton of value. There's also 4 Razor Regent. This dragon loves fighting. So enters the battlefield, you can have it fight target creature you don't control. Then whatever creature you control fights, put 2+1 counters on at the beginning of the next end step. That's going to make sure that you get those +1 counters flowing, and as you fight creatures as the game wears on, I don't know, it's a really nice kind of tribal fight lord, if you want to call it that, whatever that is. And anyway, you have a home for this fighting dragon. He really likes to fight. Put him in there. He'll be very happy. There's also some fight cards that are just kind of one-sided. So we have Nature's Way. Target creature you control gains vigilance and trample till end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. That's going to allow you to deal damage to a creature and not have that damage be dealt back to your commander, which is really important because there's a lot of times where you're going to fight a creature and there's maybe a very limited amount of creatures that you can fight because you're going to have that damage be applied to your commander. But you can simply just tap out for 2 mana and deal 8, 9, 10 damage to one of your opponent's creatures. That's going to be some really good spot removal. Same thing with Clear Shot and Ambuscade. Both of these things allow you to deal damage directly to a creature without having that damage be dealt. So that's a great way to kind of target your opponent's, your commander's triggered ability and still get rid of a creature, then fight another creature. So you can use Clear Shot or Nature's Way to get rid of one of their big creatures, then use the trigger off the target ability, kind of get rid of one of their medium-sized creature, and hopefully that should allow you to swing in and close the game out. Same thing with Rapid Bite. Once again, just having that damage be dealt to an opponent's creature without being dealt to your commander is going to be a very nice one-sided spot removal, and that's definitely a good thing to run a commander. Now, moving on to 2-card combos in the deck. Before you run this combo in your deck, there's 2 things you probably want to do. You're going to talk to your playgroup to make sure that this combo is going to be okay, and you may want to talk to the local gaming store owner to see that it's okay that you run this combo because they may kick you out. So, just a little bit of history and magic. 2-card combos, they either close the game out right then and there, or they give you so much value that you basically are going to win the game. So there's Voltaic Key and Time Vault that allows you to take a bunch of extra turns, a Splinter Twin and Deceiver Exarch that's going to allow you to make just an infinite amount of tokens and close the game out with haste. There's also just synergy combos where if you get Urza online, you're going to end up with some stupid stuff to do on turn 3, but you have access to 7 mana. And of course, something like Mindcrank and Dust Mantle, you're going to make them infinitely mill out and lose life all at the same time. These are 2-card combos that give you a ton of value. Now, moving on to the combo for the deck. That's going to be Predatory Urge and Druid's Call. Now, this is not a combo, I'm just joking, but this is one of those synergy wins that if you get this assembled, you've won the game in your heart. Stop right there. It doesn't matter the outcome of the game, you've already won. So the Predatory Urge, a tainted creature has this creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. That creature deals damage equal to its power to this creature. So it's basically the fight ability without calling it fight. Now, let's say we have Druid's Call on our commander. Whenever tainted creatures dealt damage, it puts that many squirrel tokens on the battlefield. So we get Druid's Call into our commander, we start fighting creatures. Let's say we give it indestructible. You're basically just end up with damaged squirrels, which is one of the best feelings in commander. Even if you don't have Predatory Urge on your commander, the fact that you get Druid's Call on there, give it indestructible, and then you start fighting a ton of creatures, you may end up with 10, 20 squirrels on the battlefield. And like I mentioned, you've already won the game. At that point, if you end up with 20 squirrel tokens, you're not going to officially close the game out, but everybody at the table is going to be sitting there just like, very jealous, like, yes, that's very good. But yes, run Druid's Call. If you're not running Predatory Urge, you definitely want to run Druid's Call because that's definitely going to allow you to end up with a ton of squirrels on the battlefield. Now, one thing that you do want to keep in mind in your deck building is that if you give your creature Death Touch and it fights another creature, it's going to destroy that creature. Death Touch doesn't apply just to combat only. So, let's say that your opponent has a 20/20 on the battlefield and then you have an 8/7, like your commander. You give your commander Death Touch, they fight that 20/20. As long as it doesn't have indestructible, you're going to be able to get rid of that creature. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can give your actual creature Death Touch, and it also kind of, we do have a commander that's 8/7. So, there's a lot of times where if it's going to be fighting a creature, you want to have your highest power toughest creature fight another one. But simply being able to get down Gorgon's Flail or Gorgon's Head onto one of your lower creatures to kind of make a trade for one of their bigger creatures, it's at least something you may want to keep in mind in your deck building. Simply because as long as whenever they fight, if they deal that damage to that creature, it's going to be death touch damage. It's going to kill that creature. So it's not just contained to combat damage only. As long as they're fighting and some of that damage is death touch damage, it's going to get rid of that creature. So Gorgon's Head, Gorgon's Flail, that's a great way to give your creatures death touch. And if you're building a Voltron deck where you're trying to build a very big Hydra, Quiet as Spike is a wonderful way to give it death touch and at the same time attack your opponent's life total. Whenever it deals combat damage, it's going to make them lose half of their life rounded up. And also, we're running a lot of creatures in here that have Trample, so this may be one of those spells that you want to run in here simply just to have some value. There's some other non-artifact ways we can give them death touch. So there's Ruthless Instincts. This is a wonderful card for the deck. It's going to be able to target our fight ability and at the same time target non-attacking creature, gets reach and death touch until end of turn, untap it. This is a wonderful combat trick, or you can simply just use it as a way to kind of close the game out on the second part. Target attacking creature gets +2/+2 and gains trample. This is a very nice effect for 3. There's so many ways you can use this card. Same thing with Wasteland Viper. Whenever it attacks, you can do that Blood Rush to give it death touch. That death touch is going to stick until the end of the turn. So let's say we swing it with a creature, we give one of our creatures death touch, then we start to have that creature fight a few other creatures. That death touch is going to stick around. So that's another way you can kind of boost the power and toughness and at the same time give it death touch and hopefully kind of clear the board out. And if you're running heavy on death touch, you definitely want to toss in a Viridian Longbow because, like I mentioned, death touch damage is death touch. If you get Viridian Longbow into one of your creatures and it has death touch, you're going to be able to build a pinging death deck. And if you've never built a pinging death deck, some good casual constructive magic right there. It's a lot of fun. No matter if you're a beginner or you've been playing Magic forever, being able to ping death a creature, that is one of the best feelings in Magic. So that's something you can definitely kind of incorporate into your deck building. May not want to go super heavy on death touch, but hey, if you're building a Fight Club deck, if you're building a theme deck, this is a great place to start. Now, if we're building a Fight Club deck, if we're fighting a lot of creatures, you definitely want to incorporate some sort of healing packages, and that's going to be regeneration. So run Wild and Seedling Charm. And as the rest of this video progresses, a lot of these spells kind of do the same thing. So what I'm going to do is once the slide pops up, I'm just going to be talking about their general uses and not necessarily reading the card. Run Wild is going to be great. That's going to give you a lot of ways you can kind of stack a lot of those regeneration clauses to make a lot of those fights really possible. Same thing with Seedling Charm. That's going to give you regeneration. And just like Druid's Call, Rite of Passage is going to give you a +1 counter whenever it's dealt damage. So that's a wonderful way to where if you're fighting, you can kind of really escalate those counters as the game wears on. Same thing with Mending Touch and Regenerate. These are great ways to target that triggered ability, get that to trigger, and kind of heal them. Now with Healing Leaves, this is kind of a unique way. You can target your creature, prevent the next 3 damage will be dealt to it. So that's kind of a way to, if you're setting up a big fight turn, you can prevent 3 damage. So if you want to do a little bit of combat math in your head, or at least damage math in your head, you can have your creature fight another creature, still have it stick around because you target it with Healing Leaves to prevent 3 damage. Whatever it may be, it's a targeted spell that prevents damage, so that's something to keep in mind. And then there's also a refresh. It's going to give you a card draw, which is nice to have an effect like this. Now, moving on to protection, you want to be able to give your creatures indestructible. So, Heroic Intervention, Withstand Death, there's Frying Pan Steve right there, and then Inspiring Call, which we did cover earlier in the video. These are all great ways to give your entire board state indestructible. Well, Withstand Death is going to give one creature indestructible, but I don't know, he just always looks goofy and looks like he's holding a frying pan. But anyway, it's a magical frying pan. And that's going to be a great way to give your creature indestructible. But Heroic Intervention and Inspiring Call are great ways to kind of really amplify your board state, get some card draw, or simply just protect your board state and swing into a board that's going to have a ton of, let's say there's just a lot of creatures. Giving them indestructible and a ton of big creatures is a great way to simply just say, hey, I'm going to deal a lot of damage to you. Good luck. See what you can do. Just like with Withstand Death, you want to run some sort of targeted protection. So Blossoming Defense and Hepatra's Mask. These are great ways to make sure we can keep our creatures on the battlefield. Some other ways that we can give our creatures indestructible, Hammer and Darksteel Plate. These are great equipment options to give them indestructible. And Mortal's Resolve. It's going to give them +1/+1 and give them indestructible until end of turn. So let's say we're going Mortal's Resolve. That's going to set up a really nice fight turn. Whatever combination of indestructible and hexproof creatures or spells you want to go for, it's definitely worth running them in there. And of course, Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. But it is worth noting with Lightning Greaves, there's a very good haste option. If you put Lightning Greaves on one of your creatures, you can't target that creature with your spells because it does have Shroud. So you want to keep that in mind. Little red alert right there. Swiftfoot Boots is a good option. Not saying you shouldn't run Lightning Greaves, but it's not going to allow you to target your creature. But it's always nice to go Lightning Greaves and swing in after a board wipe. So you may still want to include in your deck, but it's worth noting that with Shroud, you're not going to be able to target your creature. So definitely keep that in mind. And also, one of my favorite protection spells, not of this world, counter target spell or ability that targets a permanent you control. It costs 7 less, so basically free if you control a creature with power 7 or greater. So if you're keeping score at home, our commander is an 8/7. That's going to be a free protection spell right there, and they never see this spell coming. It's one of the best things to do in Magic, so keep that in mind. Run some sort of, you don't have to run all of these in there, but you don't run some combination of these creatures. Now, one of the ways that we can kind of amplify this targeted ability of our commanders by running some sort of kind of cantrip draw effect. All of these are going to allow us to target our creature, get that ability going, and cash in a card draw. Irresistible Prey, that's going to make it to where all creatures to block your creature, you get to cash in a card draw. Lights with Moonglove's going to give them Death Touch so they can go for that draw card ability. And also Provoke, that's going to allow them to make this creature block and cash in a card draw. Typically with Mono Green, you don't have a lot of card draw, but since we do have a commander that cares about targeting, that's going to allow you to kind of keep some of those fight triggers going and end up with a really nice board state. Verdant Rebirth, Defiance, all of these have some sort of weird option of being able to cash in a card draw and giving you some sort of incremental value. We have Feral Instinct, it's going to get +1, draw a card the next end step. Same thing with Aggressive Urge, Warrior's Lesson, Reality Anchor, Hunter's Insight. Now with Hunter's Insight, I love this card. So we have a lot of creatures that have Trample. Choose target creature you control, and that's going to trigger the ability. And then whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. So Mono Green does have a hard time drawing cards. So let's swing in. Let's say that we swing in with one of our 12/12s with Trample. We go for Hunter's Insight. We get to cash in 12 card draw. That is a wonderful effect to have. Same thing with Warrior's Lesson. That's not going to be every single damage that you go for, but being able to kind of use it at the end of your turn or at the end of combat just to kind of cash in a little bit of card draw on an unblocked creature, that is a great way to get ahead on value. So definitely something you can keep in mind. And some of the high impact card draw spells, Soul's Majesty, draw cards equal to the power of target creature you control. That's pretty much going to allow you to just take over the game, especially if you can get this to resolve unchecked. I mean, if nobody can counter it or nobody can get rid of your creature, just drawing 10 or 12 cards is going to be such a backbreaking effect for your opponents. And the same thing with Hunter's Prowess. A target creature gets +3/+3, gains Trample, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, draw that many cards. Just like Hunter's Insight, it's basically just going to be Hunter's Insight plus with a giant growth on there, which is a very nice effect to have. Outside of the card draw stuff, you definitely would run some sort of pump spell effects. We got Might of the Masses, Aspect of Hydra, Primal Bellow. These are all very high impact and very cheap bump spells. So Might of the Masses, if you're going wide with Hydra Tribal, that's going to be a lot of +1/+1 power and toughness. However, Aspect of Hydra is going to be your devotion to green, and then Primal Bellow is going to be +1/+1 for each force that you control. This is mono green, so let's say that we have our Trample creature down, we go for Primal Bellow. That's going to be a lot of power and toughness you get to throw onto one creature, especially if it's something that's blocked or if it has Trample. Great way, or you can simply just end up with a ton of, like I mentioned, if you would have a very heavy fight turn, simply just going for a very cheap Primal Bellow is going to allow you to end up with a lot of stuff. There's Vines of Vastwood that's going to be +4/+4 and protect your creature. And now Berserk, that does give you a ton of power and toughness. It's going to give it Trample, but you do have to sacrifice the creature. But let's say we've got a Hydra that's 12/12. We go for Berserk, that's going to make it a 24/24. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with Berserk that can be very debilitating to your opponent if they don't see this coming. It's definitely worth running in there. You at least want to keep it in mind. There's also Groundswell. It's +2/+2, +4/+4 if we have a land enter the battlefield. Might of Old Krosa, Praise Vengeance. Like I mentioned, I don't want to sit here and read every single card, but these allow you to get some sort of incremental value to get that triggered ability going, and at the same time, really increase the power and toughness of your creatures on the battlefield. Even stuff like Giant Growth, that's such a simple effect, +3/+3. There's Predator Strike that's going to give him +3 and Trample. And then Sylvan Might that's going to have that flashback ability. This is mono green. We have a lot of mana in here. So being able to have that flashback ability out of the graveyard is going to be a great effect to go for. Shape the Sands and then Ornamental Courage. These are one of those cards that, if, like I mentioned, if you're going for a very heavy fight turn, being able to really kind of boost the toughness of your creature, that's going to be a great way to make sure that your commander can stick around. Shape the Sands is going to give it +0/+5, and it's going to give it reach. Same thing with Ornamental Courage. It's going to give him +1/+3. You just want to make it to where you can deal a lot of that damage out and still have your commander stick around on the battlefield and just kind of cash in a lot of that value. Now, one of the other things you definitely want to incorporate into your deck building is running some sort of kind of targeting support package. Shaper Sanctuary. This is not going to trigger when you target your creatures, but if your opponents are going to target your creatures, that's going to give you a card draw with this on the battlefield. Livewire Lash. I love this card. It's pretty cool. You get it down for 2 mana, equip it for 2. Then whenever it becomes the target of a spell, this creature deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So you get this under your commander, you start targeting your, like I mentioned, you saw a lot of those spells that have the cantrip effect of target a creature, draw a card. You have this on there, you start fighting a bunch of creatures, you can use that 2 damage to kind of finish up a fight, or you can simply just start chaining together a bunch of spells, attack your opponent's life total, swing in. Then also Wild Defiance. This is a really good card for the deck. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of an instant or sorcery, right there, that's it. Your instant sorcery, your opponent's instant or sorcery, it's going to get +3/+3 until end of turn. So we have our commander on the battlefield. We go to target our commander. That trigger ability of the fight goes on the stack. Then you put the Wild Defiance trigger on the stack after that. So you're going to give your commander +3/+3. Then you have the fight ability. Then you get that other resolved of whatever spell you target it with. So with Wild Defiance, it's basically kind of like it amplifies your pump spell. So highly recommend running this in there. It just gets out of hand really quick, and especially if your opponent's trying to go for damage spells, it's just hard to break out of that value loop Wild Defiance puts, and it's some pretty good pressure. Now, there's some good creatures you can target. There's Druid of Horns, especially if you're building an Enchantress build or some sort of enchantment build with auras. Whenever you cast an aura spell that targets it, it's going to give you a 3/3 beast token on the battlefield. And then Silver Fur, that's going to allow you to, whenever you target it, that's going to give you a 2/2 wolf token each time that it's targeted. It becomes the target of an instant or sorcery. So that's kind of one of those things to where you get down this creature, you just don't have a lot of action. You just start targeting Silver Fur, and you end up with a lot of wolf tokens on the battlefield. Let's say we have doubling season on the battlefield. That's another way to kind of quick way to build up a token army pretty quick, especially if you just have dead cards in your hand. You just want to do something. You need to get some sort of value moving on the board state. And Precursor Golem enters the battlefield. You get 3 colorless Golem tokens. Now, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery that targets 1 Golem, it amplifies it out to the rest of them. So if you get this down, you're going to end up with those extra Golems. Then you're going to have 3 Golems on the battlefield. If you go for one of your pump spells, it's going to pump them all up. But if your opponent has some removal spell, it's going to get rid of all of them. So that's something you need to keep in mind. But let's say you get hit with the board wipe, you get down Precursor Golem, you may be able to chain together some really nice pump spells on your brand new board state of Golems. There's also Anathusa. Whenever you cast a spell that targets her, you can be able to turn your lands into elementals. Not super wild about that, but hey, if you want to build up some elemental, if you want to build some 2/2 warrior land creatures, hey, there you go. And then also Hero. Whenever you target Hero, you can pay X, you get to put that many +1 counters on that. This is just one of those ways you can kind of diversify your targets on the board state. You target her, dump a lot of mana, put a bunch of +1 counters, then give her trample. Hey, there you go. It's just nice to kind of incorporate some sort of ways to kind of dump a lot of these targeted spells, especially if you don't have some sort of option. Now, speaking of the Enchantress build, this would be a great Enchantress build. You're going to be able to target your creature with a lot of these auras and get some nice value. There's Canopy Cover, which is a super high impact aura. It can't be blocked by creatures with flying or reach, and it's going to make it to where your opponents can't target your creature. So basically, it's going to be like hexproof in a way. You can still target your creature, and your creatures can't target that creature. There's also Rancor. It's going to be +2/+0. It's going to give them trample. It's going to make it to where you can just toss Rancor onto, we have that Hydra that doubles its power and toughness turn after turn or each activation. So you toss Rancor on there, end up with a very nice effect for 1 green mana. And then Alpha Authority. It's going to give it hexproof and make it to where it can only be blocked by just 1 creature. You end up with a very high power and toughness trample creature. Toss Alpha Authority on there. You're good to go. It's going to be really hard to kind of bounce back from that. There's also some kind of nice, interesting effects with auras. There's Whip Silk. So basically, you can have it enchant a creature, then you can return it to your hand. So for 2 green mana, it's basically just not instant speed, but during your turn, you can fight creatures as much as you want for 2 green mana. That is a very good effect to have in this deck. And also, same thing with Talons of Wildwood. Let's say that something happens to our creatures. Being able to have that 3 mana to return it back, you just want to have that overlapping value in your deck to be able to always kind of be able to target your creature to get that fighting going if you need to. And one of the best auras you can run is a lot of the totem armor. Tree Folk Umbra, you've got Snake Umbra, Boar Umbra, you've got Spider Umbra, Bear Umbra. All these give you that totem armor. So if something happens to your creature and you're going to destroy it, you're going to be able to remove that aura and still have it stick around on the battlefield. So, and also imagine you get down your Hydra and it has the Snake Umbra, Trio, I don't know, just imagine this almost kind of like Captain Planet, wild looking creature. The totem armor is definitely going to allow you to end up with a lot of fight triggers and be able to survive those. And of course, if you're running a lot of enchantments, you're going to run some sort of value package of drawing cards. A Growthian Enchantress, Eidolon of Blossoms, and Enchantress, those are going to allow you to cash in a ton of card draw whenever you're casting enchantments. There's a lot of support enchantments in here that kind of overlap with these cards, and simply just casting aura is going to give you another card draw. So taking this deck into a heavy Enchantress build is something that I'm definitely planning on going for, and it's going to be a fun way to play the deck. There's also Oath of the Ancient Wood, which is really good. Enters the battlefield, or another enchantment enters the battlefield. You may put a +1 counter on target creature. This is perfect for Hydras. You know, they care about +1 counters. We have a lot of things that care about +1 counters, doubling those counters. So when you get down Oath of Ancient Wood, it's basically like Enchantress, but not card draw. You just basically get to put +1 counters. And of course, toss in Ancestral Mass, one of the best auras out there. That's going to get +2/+2 for each enchantment on the battlefield. It is really hard to bounce back from that. And of course, Enchantress Presence, it's going to be the enchantment version of cashing in some card draw. Really going to allow you to basically just make sure that value keeps flowing into your hand, and you can fight whatever sort of creature is on the battlefield. But that is going to be it for the deck tech. If there's something that I didn't cover, if there's something that I missed, or if there's a Hydra that you really like, be sure to leave it in the comments. You know, a lot of these people, when they watch these videos, they want to build this deck, and so if there's some sort of interaction that I missed, or some sort of really nice value, play, whatever it is, put it in the comments. That way people reading the comments can incorporate that into their deck building. But that is going to be it for the video, and if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.